Edition of Select Board Roundtable. It is February 16th, and we are making good on our commitment to do these regularly. And so I am joined this evening by John Samia, Michelle Conlon, and Mo DiPaolo. And unfortunately, our colleague Teresa Flynn is unable to attend tonight, but we wanted to make sure that we kept on our schedule. So here we are. We've got some great topics to discuss tonight, and we are really looking forward to a fun-filled, fact-filled 27 minutes. So I'm going to start with budget update. It's that season where we really start to dig into the budget, and the manager just released fiscal projection 1. This is the third year of our override agreement, and so we are still working within the boundaries of those commitment documents and within the limits that those set. It's getting to be a bit of a challenge this year with some inflationary costs, and we heard that from the manager on Tuesday night when we met. We're seeing the same sort of inflation that people are seeing in their own homes, things like fuel costs, electricity, supplies. It's all higher than expected. Parts for vehicles that we run as a town, all of it. And so that is really putting some pressure on our budget and making it difficult to kind of do the sorts of things above and beyond the baseline budget that we would like to be able to do. And we have some opportunities for some public engagement coming up at Finance Committee public hearings, which people can mark their calendars now. Those are Thursday, March 23rd at 7 p.m. and Saturday, March 25th from about 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And those are always held at Town Hall. It's an excellent opportunity for people to have a full view of everything in the budget. Department heads and departments come in one by one, present to the Finance Committee. Anybody in the audience can ask questions because it is a public hearing. It's also a really good opportunity for anybody who maybe came to the town meeting member forum and is going to be running for town meeting to get a great understanding of the budget, what's in there. It's really like, if you can put in the time, it's all of it.
Yeah, a lot of comprehensive information. All of our budgetary stuff is fully available and accessible for everybody to see. And, each department comes in and kind of goes through their needs and, what they were hoping for this year that we couldn't put through and, what challenges we're looking at, especially with inflation this year. We've heard, almost across the board inflationary issues. So it'll be an interesting budget cycle, but there's a lot of good questions, a lot of good information that comes out of that. So definitely encourage people to tune in.
And the other important thing too, going back to our commitment that we made to the voters in 2021, originally for 4 years in terms of the duration of the override. We're at 5 years now, depending on scenarios, a sixth. And what it's provided is fiscal discipline, and where you have a cap, as does the school department, which we committed to the voters. But through really efficiencies, we continue to stretch out that commitment. And as part of that, we meet with the school department regularly, exchange information, financial information, and as part of the override commitment, we meet at least twice formally a year, but talk regularly, which is really good government and good corporate good governance to make sure that you're always informed, so we work cohesively for the voters of the town.
And we were lucky. Actually, that we went to 2022 or bust, and we made it on the pension. This is our last year that we have a big payment, which actually, when you look back at what our big payments were, this was small. This payment's going to be about $1 million. Then after FY24, it drops down to about $500,000, which will be our normal cost. We were up to about $5 million.
It used to be $5 million that we put aside into the pension every year. I remember talking about that in 2014 when we were first looking for an override and saying we can't wait until that $5 million comes out of the pension. And here we are, and think about the opportunities that would have been lost.
And we're one of the few towns, municipalities in the state that's fully funded. So it
contributes to our AAA bond rating because we are fully funded.
Right. It was
less of a liability.
It was not easy to do. There were times when people said, "Oh, we should stretch it out," and yeah, we could have stretched it out to 2030, and we would have probably paid another $15 million. Cause it's like going from a 15-year mortgage to a 25 or a 30-year mortgage. So it did make a big difference, especially in the times we're in now, because 2 years ago we didn't expect we were going to have this kind of inflation.
Right.
And healthcare is still not looking good.
Right.
No.
We could we projected 7, or the manager projected 7%, and now he's thinking it could be between 9 and 12. So having that extra money, because it got absorbed into the budget right away, is really a big help, because if we had to pay that, it would be a much different budget situation than it was.
That's for sure.
And for more information as well, a lot of this we did with fiscal projections back in November. Our town manager presented to us to really drill down into the details, and all of this financial planning has been important for not only the override, but the long-term sustainability of our community. And all of that information is available either by watching the meeting in November or by requesting it. It's all public documents. But that has been absolutely imperative, working together with the schools to really long-range plan. And unbeknownst to us, when this had started in detail, the pandemic happened, and Kevin was able to pivot and utilize this information, so it was readily available for a totally different purpose, but has served us very well. And that's been a nice way to segue into our strategic planning as well. All of this has been inextricably linked to really lead to a lot of great things for our community for years to come.
Yeah, that budget document that we were looking at our meeting on Tuesday night has the icons for the connection to the strategic plan. So that's always there also to see that it's connecting. And you were talking about the school budget, and remember a few years ago before this agreement, we would all be waiting right now to see what the budget gap was going to be. And that doesn't happen anymore because we know. Yeah, you know exactly. Waiting for the budget gap, and I know it like from a parent sitting at home and saying, you know, what's the bad news going to be? What are we losing this year? And now, it's just the number is what it is, and the school department knows right away, and they're able to work and build their budget around that certainty. Yeah, it's a big difference.
And it isn't just this year. I mean, last year they had an idea. We all had an idea of where the numbers were going to be. Didn't have to wait until November, December to start to get an idea. So it made budgeting a lot easier, and being able to look in the out years and start thinking about what can we do differently, or how might we have to do something differently, makes a big difference. I mean, you can look out 5 years, and you know those numbers are always flexible, but you can start looking out that far and start to get an idea of where things are heading. It makes a big difference.
It allows for continued innovation. Originally, when the override passed, it was to continue so things would not be degraded, but also to make some strategic small investments across the whole town. So it's not these tremendously large adds on FTEs, but where it's made sense, and it's been better service levels for the community, and that's been important for everyone as well. Another thing that we talked about at our meeting was tax relief. That was another important thing when we had made our commitment to the voters, tax relief, and voting for the assessor and the other committee members for the tax relief committee.
Yep, that committee's up and running now. It's formed.
And part of one of the things was, one of the warrant articles was the equivalent of a share the warmth type, where taxpayers can elect to contribute, but also we had ARPA funds that hopefully can provide seed capital as well for taxpayers and taxpayer relief.
What do we put, $50,000?
Yeah, those tax items were huge, and we were lucky that Ruth came along because she understood how to make that happen, and we looked into that, and there were a few small ones that we knew we could do, but those weren't the consequential ones. The big one was that tax relief that we had. You could get up to $1,000 if you were a senior and met the requirements. Now it's $2,000. That was huge.
That is big. And you're talking about Ruth Anderson, who's our assessor.
Right.
Make sure that people who are watching.
And having that, will make a big difference. And there are a lot more people now who are at least looking to take advantage of it. Whether or not they will be able to, they have to fill out the application. It has to be analyzed. But there are a lot more people at least looking at it, and they might not get up to the 2,000 this year because of the way the law is written. It might take a couple of years for them to get to the full amount, but some of them weren't taking advantage of it at all. So they're going to get something more. Maybe they'll get $1,500 this year, but $1,500 off your tax bill is a lot of money.
It's significant.
So, didn't we expand the pool of people who are also eligible for it? With the income bracket adjustment. So
the income brackets changed and the amount changed, and the way the thing works is there's some funny thing about you can't get a bigger relief than what you got the year before because of the size of the tax bill. But eventually it works. And
But
that-
someone could go to the assessor's office and get information on
Right.
any of these
Just
programs.
go and fill it out, and they can help you, and that information is all confidential. It's so confidential that information cannot come out of the assessor's office. Nobody else in town hall can see that, so it is confidential. People don't have to worry about, people might know that you got $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000, but they don't know what your financials were a lot of, they happen, so people should take advantage of it. It's a lot of
Absolutely, I'm
money.
sure.
Yeah.
And just a couple other things, just as part of the commitment that we made just to report on progress. One was long-term planning documents, which identify potential opportunities for expanded commercial tax revenues. Talking about a lot of planning documents that we have, and part of this was increased community engagement, was part of the strategic plan with pop-up events or mailings or going out to the various community groups to get a lot of feedback and get as much engagement as possible so we could have an informed strategic plan, which was part of what we committed to a couple years ago, and continue to do better work every day as a town operation.
For sure. So should we switch gears?
Sure.
All right. So we had a very long meeting the other night. It was like
a
3
long
hours
one.
long. A lot happened. But one of the really important things that happened was we were able to have a follow-up conversation with Civico Greenlee, who is the developer for Beal Commons, which is 1 through 7 Maple Avenue for the former Beal School site. Just having heard the feedback from the planning board meetings, I know that many of us have attended at different times or watched them from home because we're all really interested in the process, right? Because we've had our process whereby we entered into a legal agreement with Civico, and now it's in the planning board's hands. And it's interesting to sort of see what people are saying and being responsive to that. You know, you had sent on behalf of the board a letter to the developer and asking them to focus on 4 specific areas, and they came in and presented to us their response to that. And so I thought we could spend some time just talking through, I think it was parking and traffic, snow storage in the green space, and also the massing of the building. And they did a presentation for us, which people can watch our meeting and sort of take a look at the slides and things that they put up as well.
So yeah, in terms of building, what was talked about or presented, there's going to be a reduction in size of the building by 40 feet on Haskell Street, which will result in additional green space on that side, together with a percentage decrease of retail from 7,700 to 7,000 square feet. But all of this was responsive to the feedback that was given for the desire to reduce that footprint along Haskell Ave. There were some concerns about the shadowing or shading and just the size of the building. So related to that, together with parking as well, was a big thing in terms of number of spaces and a lot more information, because originally as presented, they talked about 126 parking spaces. And at the peak time, I think on Saturday, it showed as 127, and we were actually one short. But what's clear is that 126 did not include the 20 available public parking spaces,
Yeah. Right.
plus the 10 spots on Haskell Street. So the analysis is presented during the planning board meeting suggested there were not enough spots, but it actually didn't look at the overall parking spaces. So that was one area that was really informative, that there, based on the studies and peak demand, there are enough parking spots. The other comment that had been received from the public that's important is what percentage of individuals from the nearby communities will walk, foot traffic will actually frequent these retail establishments, because I think right now the conversations have been suggesting that it's only by car.
Right.
But the whole part of vibrancy and walkability is to feed through the local neighborhoods and walking, and a resident brought that up at a hearing, and that's information that'd be really helpful, because right now I think Civico is using a lot of data out there, right? There's standards that they use, and they were really conservative, but I think it was a very low percentage. But given how I think this would be, and most people would also reason that you have that mile with the density of homes, that people are going to walk and frequent these
We
stores.
would
It's
hope
not
that
all
they
cars.
would,
Yeah.
right.
And that's the whole point of the revitalization, is to create that downtown New England style village with walkability and sidewalks and real engagement with the buildings that are there. And that's a large part of this that hasn't been factored yet.
Yeah.
And want to emphasize that the feeder is really not only the apartments that are there, but all the residents nearby, and that's the destination that we're looking for.
Yeah, I grew up in a town that has a really nice, like, vibrant downtown, and my grandmother lived within walking distance, and we used to go over to her house, and we'd walk uptown, and there were restaurants. There was a Friendly's we used to go to all the time, and there was a sandwich shop we used to love to go to, and a candy shop, and a coffee shop, all these wonderful places, and we would walk around. There was, I remember there was a news store in the center. It was called Franklin News, and we used to walk and, go get like magazines and candy and things like that when we were kids, and we'd walk back to our grandmother's house, and it was such a nice experience. And I think it's funny, like, living in suburbs like ours, it's such a car-centric lifestyle. You almost forget that you have the option. You have a friend that worked in downtown Shrewsbury, and I used to go and park at her work, and we'd go and walk around the Common. We'd walk through Mountain View, go to the library sometimes. Like, it was just, it's such a nice, pretty area to walk around.
Right.
And I think, we're so used to hopping in our car and, pulling right up to the door of our destination that you kind of forget that that's not always necessary. There's towns like Hudson, you park and you walk, and there's shops and restaurants and a lot of places to visit. So.
And they make the parking work, and there's a lot of concern about traffic, and we can get into the studies that were in here and what their conclusion is. But we look at two recent events that we've had. Well, there've been three, but the Yuletide Market. We had 3,000 people frequent that one year, 2,300, and this year, due to weather, a little less.
In a very short period of time.
In a very short period of time.
It was still really fun this year.
And just to add to me, and we know that residents are excited about this,
Yeah.
and as well as traffic worked.
Yeah,
It did work.
it did.
And there is a difference between congestion and traffic, and there's no doubt that at 3 o'clock coming up St. John's Hill, there's congestion.
Sure.
But in terms of traffic, let's distinguish between the two, and that's why at the Yuletide Market it worked. And people were parked everywhere and digested those amount of people, and it flowed.
And I think people were willing to, because there was something there that they wanted to do. And you're much more willing to deal with some traffic or congestion delay if it's something you want to do. Mm-hmm. I think there's just a trade-off there. If you're waiting a couple of extra minutes to get through, but you're going to reach a destination that you want to be at, sometimes that trade-off is acceptable.
Yeah.
Right, there's a convenience factor to it. If you're just gonna run in someplace, you don't wanna walk for 5 minutes to get there. But if it's an event or someplace that you're gonna go and you're gonna be there for a while, like if you're gonna walk to a coffee shop or a restaurant, you walk the extra distance. Most people will. But it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. And with the intermodal study, which actually, the traffic study on the intermodal study is much more comprehensive. They were all the way down with their...
Right, I was asking what those things were attached
what
to
do
the
you call
street
them?
poles, the counters.
The counters, they were all the way down to the lake. They were down to Main Street and North Quincy. So they're really going to see where the traffic's coming from, which will make a big difference when you start putting the traffic into context of what can we mitigate and what can't we? Because through traffic coming from Worcester or coming from West Boylston during the rush hour, we have limited control over what we can do about. But right in the town, we might have something that we can do. So it's going to be very interesting to see where the traffic's coming from, especially from that distance. We're really going to be able to see what's happening. But in relation to that, it was kind of funny. 2 mornings ago, I was coming from Worcester at like 8:30. I came down 290 and I got off the ramp, and the traffic at about 8:30, 8:15. So school, St. John's was open, people were going to work. The traffic was backed up from 290 on Main Street all the way up the hill. And that was not Shrewsbury traffic.
Right.
And yes, it's congestion, but we have to filter out what's happening because of people who live in town, what's happening from people coming through. It's still traffic, but is what is happening in town causing that, or is what's happening around us causing that? So it'd be interesting to see what the consultants say about what we can do about affecting that.
And similar to, which we talked about building mass, the developer also talked about working with Chase Terrace to work on buffer zone, as well as keeping some of that shading from the trees as well. So they were very responsive with the comments that were brought forward to us, hearing from the residents throughout the multiple hearings, to incorporate the feedback received to make sure that they were properly addressing that. So they've been affirmative in reaching out to them as well.
I thought it was interesting that they didn't increase the parking, but the green space that they added by reducing the length of the building on Haskell Street is going to allow them to reassess after a year what the parking needs are, and it allows them to expand parking. So it's like future expansion potential, which I thought was an interesting concept.
It's 13
not-
additional spots. I actually heard that before at a planning board meeting around the Subaru dealer, where they said, do you really need all that parking right now, or can you leave some of it as like grass and then decide if you need it? And I think that's just something that's coming as we become more aware of climate and sustainability, and not wanting to pave surfaces prematurely.
Yeah.
Right.
A resident who actually lives in the neighborhood, I think, made a comment at one of the planning board meetings, and she has a background in planning, and she says, you don't pave everything so that one time that one car doesn't, can't find a parking space. It's you don't, paving has consequences on our environment and, our runoff and surface temperatures, and it has a big impact on how we experience the community. And I thought that was an interesting comment. It was smart.
You don't build a church for Easter Sunday.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? That's the
True,
thing.
yeah,
But
exactly.
that concept has been around for a while, and there are other places in Shrewsbury that that's been done going back a few years. They call it reserve parking.
Yeah.
And so there's green space. It's designed. The parking is designed, and if it's needed, I don't think we've ever actually had anybody go back and do it. That the green space is there. The parking spaces are actually designed, and if they needed it, they would go back and do it, but they haven't had to do it. Because, Home Depot and where At Home is now, those are the lots that were done the old way.
And they're always
So
And like
empty.
a white city,
They're so
with you
big.
just these big asphalt spaces. Actually, what is it, ADAP or Advanced Auto Parts, that was part of the parking for Home Depot originally.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And so it is a good idea.
Yeah.
And if you don't need it, you don't use it. If you
Yeah.
need it, it's there.
I like that the potential is there, though. If if things open up and it turns out we actually really do need those 13 parking spaces, that it's there. The option is there,
Right.
and I think that is a smart move.
Right.
And we don't need to pave everything right now, but there's the option later. So
It's a win both ways. If you don't need it, it stays green and cool.
yeah.
And if you do need it, it means somebody's being successful. So
Yeah.
Right, and also in addition in the parking, all of this, and then the flow is improved as well as in the parking lot. So everything has been thought much further along through the comments that have been received, and there'll be more development as well. Questions about parking and how do you monitor that. They're working with a parking management company, and that will also be further developed. But very responsive to the comments received from neighbors to date,
Yeah.
and that excited to see what happens going forward, particularly at the next planning board meeting.
So speaking of comments from neighbors and comments from the public, we had a conversation about this, why it wasn't a public hearing and why the public couldn't comment on it. And
Right,
I don't know
and
if you wanna-
we were talking about it, and I know that there were plenty of people in attendance.
Yeah.
So for us to have had a public hearing we would have been inserting ourselves in the planning board process. That's where the project is right now, and that is where the public hearings are happening. And so we wanted to have a meeting with a developer that we chose to partner with to hear how they were going to address some concerns. But the place for resident feedback right now is with the planning board. And that process has to finish, and that process has to be complete before our board would have any impact on the current plan.
And the planning board is the entity that has the control over that process.
Right.
They're the ones who really can push back or make recommendations on the parking. I mean, they have the teeth to do it.
They absolutely do.
It's just like other parts of our meeting where we have meetings and we have hearings. Some of it is they're working. We're talking with the developer, can this be done, why you're doing this, why you're doing that. Planning board is different. Planning board's more regulatory. And it's the appropriate place for it. And when you look at it, look at what, I happen to think, and everybody might not agree with us, but I think what we heard last night was positive, and it came out of those hearings.
I think so too.
Agreed.
Well, the
So-
reason the developer came to us was because we heard what was being said at hearings and
Right.
sent a
Right.
letter asking for them to
Right.
reconsider some of their plans.
Right, and so, I mean, there's a place for both of those things. And ours was, okay, let us talk to you in a setting where we can have a discussion. To try to flesh out some of these ideas, and then take those ideas and bring them back into the hearing setting to the people who have to make the final decision. So I mean, that's part of the process. But people got to hear it, they got to see what they had to say. They can think about it now. They have some idea of what's going to be coming at the planning board hearing. It's not going to be new to them.
Yeah, it's on March 2nd. I think they're having it at the high school again, at the presentation room, 7 o'clock. And again, on our agendas, it was very clear that this was a meeting. When it's a public hearing, it's marked as a public hearing. We're certainly not trying to stunt people's ability to interact. We're happy to receive email. We have a public comment session opportunity before every meeting. People just need to send a quick email to the select board at shrewsburyma.gov so that they can be included in public comment. We definitely want to hear from people, but the time and place for that is something that we have to keep in mind.
Just one other thing related to this that came out and Civico clarified is the 0.7 acres, the retained parcel as
That's a
well.
good
There were a
point.
lot of concerns about whether that was going to be a ball field and the parking. And just to reset that expectation, that will be seeded, loomed, given back to the town, and that will be a discussion with the neighborhood to figure out what is the appropriate open space use for that with the community. So that was one thing as well. A lot of times in the renderings, you'd see a ball field there, and going forward, it won't be
They
that.
won't,
It'll
yeah,
cause
it's not
confusion.
going to be a ball field.
Yeah.
The first hearing we had with the reuse committee was actually in the old field school. And people had asked about that. And at that hearing, and Angela Snell was early on in the process. She was part of the reuse committee, and we had talked about, somebody actually had complained about the field being there, and we had a discussion about that at the hearings. The field is not going to stay there. It's too small. It was like the field down by the fire station. It was too small. We'll find another place for it. And actually, we had talked in town hall about if there was land available when the police station was built to try to put a field in there, but it didn't work out. The police station with the parking took more space than we thought. But it was always going to be for some kind of passive use, just public passive recreation. And I went back yesterday and looked at the RFP, so just to remind myself what it said. And it basically said that the intent of that space was...
We're out of time.
We're out of time. Well, I guess you'll have to
To
stay
be
tuned for the next one.
continued.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Thanks for watching, everyone.